Man, I've been doing well, man. Doing good, doing good. It's been a long time. How are you?
I'm still in Bangkok. I'm
Nice,
under lockdown curfew every day.
nice,
Um,
nice, nice.
so there's no traffic on the road right now. It's a complete deserted situation. Um,
Yeah,
and let's see, am I recording this? I guess so. Um, and yeah, it's such a black swan situation. It is a situation that I did not expect. I mean, sure, people have talked about. Maybe it's because of this SARS, MERS, all these other diseases. They all seemed like every one of them seemed overblown. It always seemed like it was just people talking about it, like trying to scare us, but like it seemed like there was no real chance of anything bad happening, and it just got taken care of, and then it goes away. And so that
hmm
concept of a virus having a big problem on the world, it never even entered my mind as a possibility, if I'm being completely honest. And
yeah. I mean, so sincerely speaking, I thought maybe worst case scenario is going to be another SARS situation. Or even Ebola wasn't this bad, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Like it would seem like they would, it just never occurred to me that it would spread around the world like this. Like I could see a
yeah,
virus, like, yeah, like Ebola killing some people for sure. And it's bad. But not this like
sure.
global, and it never, because of that, I never thought about what would happen, like how it would cause everything to shut down.
That's
Like,
true. That's true. That's true.
and yet it's interesting how in the past, like there's precedent for this, like during the plague times in Europe, and like
Yeah.
before they had vaccines, these sorts of practices were common, where they would block people from accessing. They would keep ships at out docked, be outside the Venice before they would actually be able to go in for like 14 days or
Interesting.
something. So yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, it's like we're back to like medieval times. It seems almost.
I know, I know. I mean, probably the thing we want to talk about today is how, despite technology, we haven't made a lot of progress. So as a generation, as a human race, towards solving these things, right? I feel like given the advancement of technology, we should have better solutions than just staying home.
Yeah,
True.
yeah.
How's the situation in California, Michael?
People are still most people are on lockdown. Retail, restaurants are still open for food and grocery. They're casting on the road. Actually, I drove to San Mother Peters yesterday, and back, but I just go out for drives. I don't even sometimes step out of the car. But yeah, everybody's mostly on lockdown, really, really, and yeah, so pretty quiet, trying to stay safe and alive.
Yeah.
I guess California is better, at least Palo Alto is better positioned than most places, because it is possible, I'm sure, for all the geeks of Palo Alto to work from home. Like that's probably a geek's
That's true.
paradise. Yeah,
That's
really. I
true.
mean,
That's true. That's
like
true.
what is a place of work if not just like a place where there's another computer you go to? Like it's
Mhm.
I think there's at times when it starts to feel funny because the human connection is lost, right? And you're like, so in this case you are forced to be home, not like you wish to be home. So yeah, I mean, like I've been very busy, but for like very probably too busy, in the spirit. But I
busy.
can definitely see why people might feel uncomfortable. Yeah.
How were you busy exactly? Like busy, like just doing video calls and stuff, or busy?
So busy doing video calls, busy doing consulting. Actually got a lot of like different opportunity to help people work on different projects this past 3 weeks, especially. So yeah, it's been quite busy. Yeah, so mostly working behind my desk, and then there are days when I'm on video calls for like 6 hours, and it's I mean insane, but it's all good.
Interesting. Now, I suppose we should check to see if anyone else is joining before we what we decide what we're going to do here.
I feel like it's a nice start, though, to hear from different parts of the world what the perception, kind of the situation is there.
Yeah,
So
our
we started with.
global. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, no, I thought that was pretty cool hearing from Bangkok, from California. How's the perception of how your president is positioned in the US?
I guess that's for me, right? I actually haven't discussed a lot with people about the president per se, but personally speaking, I think I'm a little bit emotionally disconnected from what's going on in Washington, just because I feel like he's LDR for me that way, both psychologically and emotionally. And then I also feel like everybody knows that it's gonna be the same old, saying untruths and manipulating people with lies. And so, yeah, personally speaking, I've not had a conversation with people about president, so I'm not really sure what's going on. Yeah. I guess that kind of explains most of the, things you would like to hear. It's just like, okay, guys, this guy is not going to be helpful anyway. So.
And
it doesn't look like a van.
Go ahead.
Daniel, that doesn't look like a van.
Yeah, I'm currentizing at my parents' place because it's nicely in the woods and.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Right. Yeah. You're back out. Yeah. You're
That's
off
awesome.
You're off your super mobile system.
Yeah. Even though the weather is so good, that I'm thinking that I should just isolate myself in the van again. Yeah.
Huh. Would you be arrested for that? Like, do they stop people if they're out past 10 p.m.
In the state that I'm currently in, no. We have something that is called basically like a social lockdown. You're not forced to be at home, but you're not allowed to meet more than one person that is not from your household.
That's difficult to enforce, I would imagine.
Yeah, but it's enforced.
It's
like at least in public places is where they can check.
Okay, fair enough. But if I have like different people coming to my house, I don't see how they could really check that. But
yeah, actually, I think Poland is checking these kind of things by having an app where you need to basically take a selfie of yourself, which has face recognition to like actually recognize it's you, plus it looks at the location if that's really your home, and that's how you're checked that you're like where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, so that's obviously an easy conversation would be the fact that the governments around the world for justified reasons or not have now become essentially totalitarian states. It's remarkable how the last 2 months has changed the world. It'll take years of books to process, what's just happened. But I suspect that the encroachment on our civil liberties will never go back to the way it was, because there's always the threat of another pandemic. So it'll be easy to justify the idea that everyone needs to be tracked. I don't want to say I told you so, but on this front, I think I've been pretty accurate in that it seems like there's a ratcheting effect with the privacy where there's always a good reason to remove someone's privacy. And the reason to keep privacy is very intangible, right? It's just someone doesn't want to be, someone doesn't want to have their information shown. Like, it's just not a nice thing to have happen. But there's always another reason for the government to say, well, if you give us a little bit more information about where you're located, then we can track the disease better. And in the past, the only good justification they've had for violating our privacy has been terrorism. I haven't really heard the idea of, tracking our movements and everything because of the virus before, tracking a virus before. But now they've got the perfect excuse. It's not just terrorism, it's also pandemics. So now everyone's position at all times of the day will be tracked by the government. I mean, don't you think? It seems like that's where we're going.
So I think I mean, the downside of, oh, hi, Michael. Nice that you
Hey,
turned your video
how's it going? How are you?
on. Um, so I think there's a bit more as to giving away your privacy instead of just this intangible, like disliking of giving away your privacy, because you don't know what people are going to do with your data. Like at the end of the day, systems are not entirely safe. What someone will do with it is also not entirely clear. So I think there's a bit more risk involved, but not going into that discussion. What I think is that the risk has always been there, right? And we also always knew that it is a risk that is low probability, maybe, but it has a potentially huge impact. And I think this is currently happening. This is why currently we're willing to give up our privacy for basically a huge life or death situation. And I think after that, I can imagine that maybe some laws are changed, but I don't think that we will consistently give up our privacy for this.
So I feel like turn in two directions. Two directions. One direction is using my privacy because you have not been able to successfully control a pandemic. You have not provided healthcare to people. You have not provided free testing and stuff like that, and you're not taking care of public health enough, and therefore you need my privacy to be able to do that. So it sounds like an excuse. And then the other part is I feel like privacy, governments and corporations now understand the value of private data, right? And therefore this might just be an excuse to maybe for good reason in a way, or to actually do that. And given the value in private data, I would definitely agree with Michael that we're not. I'm not sure we're going to. It's going to take another event to trigger us in a different direction, tangential, right? To say, okay, to right now, the government has the control of the what's it called right now, or conversations around privacy, because there's a big excuse. And like to take another event to trigger us in another direction to say, we need privacy, and maybe to get, the human rights groups to say, okay, we need to have, better controls around privacy, and we need some bigger thing to also happen to say, okay, we have to wrestle this back of the government, and then there's also the risk of. I feel like, as a public, the government and corporations are potential allies. And so the general public, on an individual level, we're probably going to be powerless against, the government and corporations who want to control our private data. So in that light, we might see some bit of, collusion between both parties. So government has some data, private sector has some data. Both parties are going to collaborate to use or leverage private data for whatever means that they want to. Now, maybe in the future, we'll probably start seeing a lot more, depending on how things go, a lot more organized, civil rights, civil liberty organizations, and going to courts to sort out, who should control private data. That's the way I think this might play out.
It just seems like the countries that have been successful, that they've done track and trace, like South Korea, Taiwan, and so it seems like tracking seems like a viable way to control the spread of these things, and that requires a lot of violation of privacy.
Have you seen the cooperation announced yesterday by Apple and Google?
Not sure.
I
saw the news. I have not read it. Do you want to say more about it?
So I guess it goes in the direction of like a bit against what you were just saying, Michael, that it doesn't necessarily need to go together, like giving up your privacy and still backtracking. And basically what they're doing is, everyone has an Apple or a Google or an Android phone. So
sure.
Phones will basically communicate with each other when you meet another person, and basically hash these other phones and basically store the data, but in an anonymous way for up to 14 days. And once you basically are identified as positive for COVID, you will put it into an app by the government that is partnered with Apple or Google, and that will upload the data to all the hashes, and all the hashes will eventually receive a note. Which I guess, so first of all, I think it's really impressive that these like two huge, like the largest corporations in the world are basically cooperating on this.
Yeah.
And secondly, what I think is interesting is that this finally looks like a win for the capitalistic or the very democratic kind of societies, because China was positioning themselves as big winners with their authoritarian approach to all of this. So yeah, I thought that was cool information. What do you think?
I can jump in there. I feel like it's great. First and foremost, right, I think in a way, I still prefer private sector, doing something on public data, on private data, and having government as a referee, like no matter how inefficient they are, having some government as a referee. Now, the part that I would not necessarily like is a collusion between government and private sector, because then there's no referee, right? And so there's nobody to run to say, hey, this guy is behaving, wherever I can. So if you're playing a game and it's all battle to one, and there's no there's no umpire, and I think that's where there's a problem. So in this case, it might appear as if the government is still like a referee, so to speak, but but it's more like a pseudo, oh great, government collusion / government to the referee situation. I think it's great for public health in general. And for now, I think we needed something like that. We needed these two big players to collaborate and solve this problem. And it's positive, but what happens afterwards is probably what might be difficult to tell.
I agree with you, Michael. That isn't it funny that we would rather have our data in the hands of huge corporations than of the government? Like, that's just how much trust we place in these companies for how they run their data centers versus how I believe I know how bureaucrats and how that's managed, and how how their IT procurement projects sort of work, and the supervision there is just far less secure than, just look at Google and Facebook. They're curators of exabytes of data, but they've never had significant data breaches. There's definitely been lots of data breaches all across the board from lots of companies, for sure. But when a company gets to that scale, they adopt best practices that I think lock down that data pretty effectively. Like, and if you salt the passwords and you sort of make it physically impossible for an employee to access the data, and you do basically if you adopt all the right best practices, then it should be possible to set up a self-reinforcing system where it really is safe. I think the places where we've seen like huge data breaches, like at credit rating companies or places like that, is when they just have scandalously bad privacy practices. And so in those cases, they've had breaches. But places where people do it right, it seems like it does work. And again, I trust the government trust the private companies more than I trust the government for that. Anyway, and I agree with you there too. Like the idea that every business, I think, that has some notion of stewardship, or of being a good corporate citizen, of being a citizen of the world, and their employees all have interesting ideas for how to make the world a better place. And so I think all that ingenuity is being unleashed in the world right now. I think the only example of this that we've seen in the past, maybe, I don't know, World War II or something, where, sorry Daniel, I know you're on the other side of that, but like on the Canadian and the American side, like the private industry all over the place was banding together to think of ways to contribute to the war effort, and it was considered like a patriotic thing. Can we go to our next topic, or Daniel, do you want to say something more about that?
No, I I think I like Michael O's point about basically the referee function, that this might be also just a contributing factor for us trusting private companies for the existence of a referee and someone to like actually enforce some rules, you know? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I'd like to ask something positive. Like, do we see any benefits? I mean, I just talked about privacy, and we talked about, I mean, private companies maybe helping to address some of the issues with the virus. But what about positive spin-offs or benefits that might arise from this, interregnum that we're all facing globally here? For me, I think one benefit might be that all the other viruses that we contend with every year, but we somehow accept as normal, the cold and flu viruses. There's apparently over 100 viruses that circulate for the common cold. And then there's the influenza virus, of course. There's a few viruses for that one too. And they circulate. And up until now, for some reason, public health systems haven't bothered to track who has the virus. I mean, if I get the cold, there's no place for me to enter that information into a database. Like epidemiologists at the public health systems don't keep track of that. But it seems like now there's an opportunity with all this attention on viruses to maybe also reduce the economic impact of the seasonal cold and flu that costs the economy billions of dollars a year globally, and also kills hundreds of thousands of people every year. So we make on net actually save lives if this coronavirus thing ends up stimulating in its acute sort of political will punch to the system, force us into actually fixing this virus situation that's otherwise been in kind of a boiling the frog type situation where every year we get seasonal flu, 500,000 deaths every year, but we don't do anything about it because it just feels normal. But now it doesn't feel normal. Now we have an excuse to really change and do something.
And do you know what the potential impact of that would be? Like would it be actually practicable to identify these people on an effective basis?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I haven't read anything tremendous about this, but I guess we have this notion of the R naught, which is the number of people that each person who's infected infects. And if that number drops below 1, then the virus goes away, because after successive generations, there's actually fewer people each time that have the virus until there's no people with the virus.
Okay.
And so
you're saying, if you like captured early in the season, you might basically keep the R naught like below 1 for the whole season, and therefore drastically less people will be infected. Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I think just like basic practices, like we're not shaking hands anymore. That's not coming back anytime. It's sort of, I have a disgust reaction whenever anyone wants to shake my hand now. I don't think that's changing. And practices like social distancing, but also tracing. If the public health system aggressively goes after people who are infectious, there's also a social stigma, I think, about going to work now. If you're sick and you have a cough, it used to be, I think, seen more like you're a hero if you do that, or people would laugh. I don't want to make it seem like I'm like this hipster that I've done everything before and I'm the coolest guy. But I certainly remember in the past I would be like neurotic about people if they're coughing. I'm like, go home. What are you doing at the office? Like, I don't like this, or not wanting to shake hands with people, and people would laugh at me. But now who's laughing, right? So I think that may bring the R naught down significantly.
True. Actually, we also like in the startup world, I've seen this very often, where you need to be very careful about your resources, that people that are sick should focus on getting healthy again. That's the best thing for the company overall.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I agree and says that the infrastructure, the practices, the healthier practices when it comes to hand washing, social distancing, would change the course of human behavior, like on the planet, into the future, right? The infrastructure, the system that we've built now would help us fight diseases, in the future, especially if infectious one. Now that technology companies are building some solution that will be helpful. I mean, I think Apple is also trying to list testing centers on Apple Maps so that, you know, people can know where to go for testing. The part I'm not sure of is how that might affect other coronaviruses like flu, in the sense that I don't know how much of people might be willing to share that information with each other, or to say, okay, you've been in contact with somebody, and therefore you would. I mean, it's not necessary that if you've been in contact with somebody that has, you know, flu, you would have flu. I don't know how infectious it is compared to COVID-19, or maybe just a common cold. But for sure, I think that people would be more cautious, and people would expect you to self-isolate if you fall sick or you have a cold. And that for sure would be probably you'll be seen as a normal behavior for you to say, call in sick, to say stay home, work from home if you have a cold, because, you know, we don't know whether you're resurrecting COVID-19 or it's just a common cold or it's influenza, right? So yeah.
Yeah, it's like after September 11th. I mean, how quickly did we go back to normal? Did we stop caring about, you know, I don't know, being, you know, worrying about, you know, watching for terrorists everywhere? I don't know. I think to an extent people will go back, and maybe people will stop, as you say, wanting to share all this information about, you know, if they have a cold or something. And yet, I think some things did remain. I mean, certainly security practices at airports and other practices, they stuck to this very day. So I think there will be a memory effect. It's quite analogous, I think, quite fittingly, to the human body's immune response. I think getting this thing all of a sudden is triggering the human society to develop antibodies against future crises like this, I think. So we've stimulated our own societal immune system to care about this. So we will now be ready. I mean, you see that with Singapore, with Taiwan, with South Korea, where they had SARS and MERS before. And so their society was sort of primed already to handle this. So they were much, much better at handling this time around than many other countries who were caught more flat-footed.
True, particularly testing infrastructure. Yeah, they had a good basis for that. Interesting plot twist. What if the virus is the Earth's immune response to the human, to our society?
Wow.
I hear a lot of people on right-wing blogs talking about that. Not to you know, associate your thought with something bad and therefore refuting it. It's a thought worth considering. I don't really know what credence we need to say. Yeah,
I do have a thought on that though. I feel like, you know, if you consider the fact that the reasons why we had this virus possibly was because of human interaction with animals, and what we called eating of different animal protein products, and the Wuhan wet market in China and all of that. So you could say that, you know, human actions, you know, caused this to happen, and therefore you know, in a way, this could be the environment, you know, fighting back and saying that because if you do something that, you know, that might be sort of, you know, injurious to the ecosystem, then you also get affected as well, in a way. And we always seen previously, like if you have an ecosystem that is overpopulated with a particular species, right? You know, it might cause some bit of how do I put it right now? Some bit of effect where that particular species kind of destroys itself, you know. Like if you cram, I would use an analogy that if you cram human beings in a particular, say, building, right? It's unhealthy, right? You're gonna get infected. If you cram humans and animals and different things in a particular place, something's gonna happen that is probably not be good for everybody. So it's probably, in a way, there is some truth to that. I don't know if my question was scientific, but yeah, I would agree with that.
That's fair.
Yeah. If we go back to the idea of, okay, we will, like, one thing we might learn from this is maybe, okay, we have an app that shows us the probability that we might be infected with some seasonal virus or something like that based on the date on the people we've met in the last couple of weeks. So that's just an implication of this tracking thing. I think another industry that will probably benefit is maybe the testing industry. Maybe there will be some privacy, less risky way of actually equipping households with testing devices that will test, I don't know, on certain. For example, I think YC actually has one company that has a device where you can that you can plug into your phone and make certain kinds of tests, that is now also supplying a lot with regards to indications for COVID. So yeah, that's definitely one positive implication that I could see that could prevent future, like, lower key diseases, but also pandemics. What if we think of other industries that will profit a lot? For example, okay, all this biotech, AI-driven drug development.
Yeah, 100%.
One
like,
thing I see.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just wanting to spit maybe some ideas. The other thing is, like, all the digital health space in general. I think telemedicine and all of that. If you look at how much money Zoom is making at the moment, and other communications companies, what will they do with that money? How will that sector grow? Will VR somehow soon become like a good reality? Or
Yes.
So what are we seeing?
What I see is, as you know, both of you, I'm sure, know how venture capitalists, they like to promote themselves as, or anyway, there's a mystique around venture capitalists, like they know what a good company is, what a bad company is. I think the reality is they follow a herd, they follow a zeitgeist, generally speaking, and it's just human nature. That's how it generally works. And so, for example, talking to some scientist, talking to some scientist on the news, I was seeing a scientist talking about how a couple of years ago he was trying to get funding for coronavirus vaccine research from VCs, and he couldn't get any interest. He was close. He just needed to run a clinical trial, and he would have a coronavirus. This is for one other specific coronavirus, I guess. I'm not sure of the details, but the point is there was no funding available for that kind of activity. Of course, now it's going to be very easy to have a conversation with the VCs because they're all primed to fund anything in this space now. And so that's great news for I think overcoming these problems. Like you say, Daniel, there's home-based test. Certainly if there could be a test where people blow into a tube or something and then they get told if they have a virus even before they have symptoms, then you're going to reduce the number of days people are out into the world spreading the virus while they're asymptomatic, and that could easily tip R naught down below 1 for many of the viruses. And if a test works for one coronavirus, surely it's not that hard to develop for other analogous viruses. So on that front, definitely yes. On the front of VR and video conferencing, hopefully this will again give a nice little story to any startup pitch to say, look, coronavirus, therefore you should fund us for having better video conferencing, where let's say we can talk over each other and it doesn't sound like garbage, which I kind of find frustrating with 10-person video conferences.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if I wonder though that I think that this is great in the sense that in the positive side, I believe that there'll be more fund available for for biotech and healthcare, life science related projects, and startups will raise money. But I also feel like there will also be probably too much money pouring into that space unnecessarily. because conventionally VC money has not been a very good way to raise money for biotech, just because it's specialized and the chance of success is quite unlike tech. It's the chance of success, especially for new drugs, indication, and vaccines. It's quite unlike tech, and VC may not be the right financial tool instrument to raise money for that particular space. But it's going to be positive for now, because more money is needed to go to that space, and it will. It's just like most of it might go to waste, from where I can see. So because a lot of people want to do something in that space, and people are pouring money without necessarily understanding it. It's going to be like Bitcoin, right? People pour money, and people are going to lose money, and we'll probably have a few, innovations that might be useful longer term. But yeah.
Hey, so I just looked up. Zoom peaked with a market cap of 33 billion in March. Like, what are they gonna do? What are they gonna do?
Raise funding, I hope. They better do it quick.
Okay, but in terms of R&D?
Well, hopefully they can do end-to-end encryption, because that was an embarrassing thing when it was found they didn't have it when they said they did.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think if there was a serious, the serious amount of money that Zoom now has, they could potentially upgrade their product. I mean, and it's not just Zoom. I mean, Microsoft Teams is a fantastic product as well. There's Skype. I hope we never get product sponsored for this podcast, but Skype, I've never been a fan of Skype. I find it perennially screwing up in some way or another.
I've used Skype thanks to COVID. I've used Skype again in over a decade, because I'm working with like a mental health humanitarian kind of project, and everyone there uses Skype, and it's horrible.
It's amazing how 10 years, so much money, they know it sucks. How do they not know their own product sucks, and yet they can't make it better? I don't understand.
Like, maybe that's their plan. Next, they thought, okay, now we're going to do this with LinkedIn.
Yeah, maybe.
How much has LinkedIn improved since Microsoft owns it?
Well, it does seem to me like video conferencing, it's gotten a lot better now that there's better bandwidth, for sure. But like some basic things that I think could still be improved with video conferencing on the hardware and software side are definitely, like, it's not the bandwidth anymore that's the problem, but it's sort of like the audio quality. Like, they should somehow microphones and there should be like a best practice headset microphone combination that people can use, like the average person can use, that really gives just like whisper quality audio, right? Where it's like you're right beside the person, you can close your eyes, it's right there, feels perfect. And you can talk over the other person. And if it could be that good, like, you're lying down in bed with your significant other, and there's no lights, right? So you don't hear, you don't have to talk about the video quality. But if you're lying there, you got your eyes closed, you should be able to talk as if the other person is right there lying in bed with you. I mean, why can't we get to that quality? There's no bandwidth issue anymore. So I think a startup that can crack that, or maybe some Zoom, internal team can crack that, then I think that's going to get us to the next level. It's the same thing with VR. When they improve the latency of moving the head, just that beyond that threshold, that 60 frames per second, the human brain started to recognize it as reality. And I think it's the same thing with video conferencing. It's not quite there. We haven't passed that threshold where it feels just very much like you're right there with the other person. And if we can do that, then I think we've really got something. Like, how many times have we talked about in the past the idea of like having an AI video correction where it, like, in real time puts my eyes looking at the camera. So I can look down at, Michael or Daniel's face, but it puts my eyes up into the camera. So we're actually looking at each other's faces, right? I mean, little things like this, they could fix it. I don't understand why they haven't yet.
Would it improve or worsen video calls? I don't know. I feel like I would be on the opposite side of you.
You don't want to look in my eyes?
No, I would argue, that it would worsen, it would take away authenticity, concentration, micro communication through body language. I don't know, just some guesses. What I would think it would be not desirable.
Well, next up for sure, I guarantee you within 1 or 2 years, I'm going to be able to, instead of just change my background like I am now, I'm going to be able to puppet Barack Obama or something. And it's going to be, hello, Daniel, I'm Barack Obama.
Yeah, I think if you really wanted to, I mean, that should be possible. Or like to just you could just put a video of yourself and just always look away when you're talking.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
but
exactly. Or you're asleep, but it keeps you open and like really alert. And yeah, like totally like the market for video conferencing where it like changes your background into like an executive background, like I'm already sort of doing, and then it like gives you a suit and it like fixes your hair and makeup in real time. Oh, for sure. I mean, that's 100% going to be Zoom they've got to be investing in that.
Yeah, I think in terms of like some augmentation to improve your look, definitely. But in terms of the eye contact, maybe not that. But if you went to like wear a new hairstyle for the next meeting, you could definitely like just change it or wear new clothes, right? So you just change your clothes and use some augmentation, and then you can look differently depending on the audience you're meeting up with, right? So I mean, that definitely might be a strong use case for that.
by the way, in terms of positive changes coming through this whole situation, have you noticed also that if you go to a supermarket or something, that people are more relaxed? I mean, they keep their distance because they must, but like it feels like kind of taking more care of yourself and the others, being less stressed, less annoyed if the queue isn't going forward or something like that.
I haven't left my house in weeks, so I don't know.
You get everything by delivery?
Yeah. But it's nice to hear there's a camaraderie, there's a stiff upper lip happening. That's good. I always was afraid that the greatest generation was like truly better than me in some like fundamental way. Like my grandparents' generation was like they somehow had like been raised better than us. And maybe it's still true, I don't know. But I feel like we've acquitted ourselves at least somewhat okay. What do you guys think? Like are we the spoiled brats that the media keeps saying that we are?
I actually don't think so. I mean, we faced as a generation. We were young when it was 9/11, right? And then we had it 2008, and then we had this. I feel like whether even if we were spoiled brats, right? Events of our lives have made us like mature. We're probably more experienced compared to number of years than most other people. I mean, Warren Buffett was saying that it took him 80-something years to see something like this, happen. This COVID-19 economic situation, right? So I think that we are actually, life has matured us. Whether they like it or not. I don't think we're supposed by it. I think we've seen it, like and we also. I mean, one thing we don't get credit for is the fact that we're actually more open-minded than previous generations, and we are also the innovative generation. We've seen technology move from like big handset to tiny mobile phones. We've seen and we've adapted, right? And so I definitely don't agree with that conclusion. Yeah.
Maybe we'll come out of the situation though by having like a collective feeling of being spoiled brats and putting more emphasis on. So I think that's a very interesting situation that is happening right now, in the sense that it suddenly points out all the system or mission critical jobs, and value that is created in our society. Like in terms, like all kind of let's say kind of capitalism supporting jobs somehow can't like actually buy you anything, like consultancies, financing and stuff like that. Suddenly we're seeing just the importance of these mission critical jobs. I think that's something. I think with regards to that industry, I think things will change.
Well, those mission critical jobs. So you're saying that consultancies are mission critical? I'm assuming you're saying they're not, right?
Yeah, I think they're supportive of the basically part of the system that is less value creating for, you know, human flourishing.
Well, I don't know if I would go so far as to, because I mean, those sorts of jobs, I mean, anyway, it really depends on what we're saying exactly. But one area that I think it's clear we're sort of helping to accelerate its demise is the idea of offline shopping, where you're shopping in a mall, and that whole practice, the idea that all of our public space, you know, out in the world, that if you're not sitting at your home in your private space, if you're out in a public space, you have to be buying something. You have to be interacting with people by purchasing things. I think that, especially in Asia here, where everything is centered around malls and markets and people selling you things, I think it would be nice if we could get society away from that, because to me that seems like not really the best way to be running a society where everything has to be purchasing things based. I think it's nice that now the logistics is sort of just pulled back to its bare bones, where you want something, it just comes to you, and that's it. You don't need to be constantly hawked at everywhere you go. And instead, I think maybe interaction is done only when people want to interact. So if I want to interact with someone like you two, then I can do that on a video conference. And I think this way of living is sort of more authentic in some way.
I agree with the part that's like you choose interaction that you want, because it's some form of like expressing or being self-responsible, you know, like going into interactions you want, and therefore somehow, yeah, I guess increase authenticity, as you said. But I feel like, yeah, local shops, I mean, here in Germany, there's a lot of initiatives to save your local shops, because they also they include some randomness in the encounters that you have, which is, I think, also important, because if you only choose, I mean, this isn't that kind of like almost at the heart of what a democracy should be like. You should have random encounters. Like I think that's important to like stay open in your mind, stay flexible and strong in your arguments, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
true.
definitely agree with you on in the serendipity, right, in the conversations, right, and that randomness is very, very important. But I also think that, you know, the way, I mean, we create our systems the way, you know, the way the world you know, was used to working before. I felt like of course we had a lot of, you know, human interactions that we don't necessarily require per se, but I think it was designed that way because we needed to move around. We needed to, you know, like work in a place that has people were used to working in offices and all of that. And now we're getting used to a different way of working. I think in the future, we don't, this is not ideal. Maybe that earlier version was also not ideal. I think we will probably, you know, arrive at some place in the middle where you work half remotely and half in an office. Even for most people will do that. And then, so therefore you have more control, but, you know, not all control. You know, you won't have 100% control, because you also need to interact with people, get to build personal relationships, build emotional connections. I think also depending on your personality type and the type of work you do, this is good for you. This is probably good or worse for you. You know, better or worse for you, depending on what that is. So it's definitely not ideal. But I can definitely see a situation whereby most people would work part-time remotely and part-time in an office in the future. And that could also have a lot of implications for economic costs of running an office. So maybe offices would not have to, if you have 100 staff, you don't have to have 100 workspaces in the office, because, you know, most of the time people would not be in the office, for sure. Yeah.
Well, you're both talking about like the idea of interacting with other people socially, and I that was actually an aspect that I didn't think about as much when I was making my point. My point I think, was less about the value of human interaction as it was about the wastefulness of the way that we get our material goods. And I guess it was a little bit about human interaction too. But it seems like, just to take an example, Netflix, right? So what Netflix and video streaming managed to do was to replace the previous way that we consumed video. So when in the past, what we'd have to do is the movie studios would have a movie, they would release it, they would print it on these rolls and reels, and they would truck them out to, you know, locations, or maybe fly them out to locations around the country to show on first run. And then they would print on these plastic, you know, cassettes, millions and millions of these cassettes, and they would again distribute them out, and then there would be stores that would sell them, and they would, anyway, so it was a very manual, bulky process with lots of physical things moving around, pollution, and a lot of needless middlemen involved in all that. And now instead, of course, with Netflix, we have, it just goes straight to you through the magic of the internet, some data centers, and that's it. And so it seems like a better process. Not only is it, you know, a better user experience because you can watch whatever you want, but it's also just in terms of environmental wastefulness and in terms of human wastefulness, like all those people that used to be involved in moving video cassettes around get to do something else, something higher value. And I think it's the same with how we get all of our other goods through shopping at malls, where, you know, we have to build a mall, we have to populate it. There's these thankless people that are just standing there waiting for a customer all day long. Their whole job is to just sit there and wait for somebody so they can supervise the moving of a purse over into their hands. And then it just seems like that whole thing is a human waste. And I don't like that the most beautiful public spaces here in Southeast Asia are the malls, which are basically subsidized by the, you know, rich ladies that every once in a while buy an Hermes purse. And that's why we have a huge Hermes store, you know, that's, you know, whose rent is subsidizing the creation of this beautiful, like, arching space with trees and cool stuff that we can all walk through as we go from the light rail line to our office. It would be nice if instead, you know, we had a more authentic space to be operating in, like we're walking through a park or we're walking through a space that's paid for somehow else.
That will also raise and I think this conversation that's raised in general these days with regards to UBI, because I mean, no doubt it's inefficient and many things are also with maybe not mission critical jobs and so on and so forth. I think the discussion with regards to UBI is, I mean, it's basically starting to be applied in lots of regions so that people don't go to work. Yeah, so I think that will be insane. That will probably be a big push forward for UBI.
Oh yeah. They don't call it UBI, but you're right. Everyone everywhere has implemented a UBI essentially. Yeah, I mean, not quite, but the wage subsidy, yeah, is getting close. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Anything else somebody wants to talk about? Otherwise, this is a short and sweet little chat, little catch up. Oh, Michael,
you're muted. Just 3D printing, by the way, is another technology that's, I think, will have a big push forward through this crisis.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Because people now have to do things by themselves and forced to create spare parts or break their own things, DIY and stuff like that. I was also talking about the economic implications for people who are in the lower strata of the economic system, and how this has impacted them in terms of their, since they live on the their wage, and so they want to get back into working as soon as possible, and that's not been, and so I was kind of theorized about something, right? We created economic systems so that society can flourish, right? And somehow we've had, almost some majority of the world population, like probably some 30% or between 30 and 40% are living in some kind of poverty. And so we have created a system that is imperfect. And because those of us on the upper strata of the economic ladder, we're not affected. And we're also the one who has some power to do something about that. So I was just wondering if this situation will make us to start thinking in sense of how do we create a more equitable economic system for everybody, so that
My hope is that it will go exactly in that direction, that we will basically rethink about the goals of the economy and where that will go. Also, maybe this crisis shows us a bit what's possible if you want to, if you like really want to save lives through the crisis, because like the next one is on the corner, right? Climate change, for example, like suddenly everything here is super like smog free. You see, you have heard all the stories, right, where there's like fucking dolphins in Venice.
That was a hoax, by the way.
So yeah. What was a hoax?
Yeah.
Next topic, fake news. How
that's
can
fake
we
news,
control
but everything else is true. Like,
yeah,
you're right, less pollution, less whatever. But that particular one example was too good to be true.
Thanks for pointing it out. I mean, there are other like situations, I think, where similar things happen that are correct, like certain wild animals in Latin America and the big cities where they used to live and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, the in Thailand here, the problem is all the monkeys are used to the tourists feeding them. So now there was this viral footage a couple of weeks ago of like this huge troop of monkeys going to war with another huge troop of monkeys over food because they don't have enough of it anymore. So they took over this huge public space and they were like fighting each other. So. And
also, like in Germany, there's the big problem. Like, I guess it's not on everyone's radar, more maybe in the like animal rights scene, and I consume information from there. But what's the English name of this bird that was used to send letters? That is basically like
pigeon,
domestic. Yeah, pigeon.
Raven? Pigeon.
No, pigeon, and they're like literally they're literally dependent on humans because we made them. We put them into this ecosystem how it is, and now they're not getting any food and nothing, and yeah. It's a lot of interesting implications. Okay.
Just to comment on Michael's point there, where he's saying, what about how do we ensure that this is not disproportionately impacting the poor? And I would say that unfortunately, just like in the financial crisis, the way in which the bailout, if you want to call it that, has been engineered across the developed world and across really the whole world is it's a carbon copy of the way that it was done last time, in that the people that are in charge of printing our money, they are basically buying up the debt of these large companies, which has the effect of bailing out the risk-taking tranche of the owners of these companies. So all the hedge funds and the richest people in the world you can think of, the people who are least in need of a bailout, they are the ones who are being bailed out by a vast majority of the amount of money that's being spent here. And it's not really the reason why they're doing it that way. It's sort of just the way that it's being done. And I think there have been plenty of comments out there saying, hey, why are we doing this? This is precisely the kind of risk that people are supposed to be, facing the music on. If you took the risk in investing in an airline business, then guess what? You should, lose all your money if you're an investor and if the business goes under. So the people that we should be helping are the people. Like, they should be the ones getting the UBI because their company went under. But it should not be the shareholders of the company that get bailed out. And this is interesting because I think of myself as, libertarian. You can call it right wing, I suppose. But this aligns me with, you know, the most left-wing activists. So it's interesting how, you know, we go hand in hand on this, where like, look, these giant corporate subsidies that are getting passed because it's a crisis, and like this, the legislation that's getting passed in the last couple of weeks is more impactful than the last 10 years combined, right? This is going to change for a generation our financial situation, even more than the financial crisis 10 years ago. And yet, look, it's happened, right? The ship has sailed. It's a done and dusted deal already. And that's really unfortunate, I think, because as I say, it's really bailing out the wrong people. And what it's doing is it's setting us up for the next crisis, because the people are never learning their lesson, right? And the lesson that they're learning is they can take a risk and they never have to face the consequence. So they can take all kinds of bad risks. And so money gets misallocated. All these investors will put their money in perhaps bad investments because they don't get the right risks, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I definitely agree with you in the sense that if you are taking an enormous amount of risk because of a huge payoff, right? You know, and if you take that risk, the reason why, the upside is like you'll make a lot of profit, right? The downside is you lose a lot of money. So if you take away the downside, then you're actually not taking risk. So it's your risk risk return is like, you know, it's actually no risk plus high returns. It's kind of like whopped, you know.
I mean, the problem is, what do you calculate in if you take this kind of risk? I guess you calculate in everything that is in a reasonable amount, like reasonable space of probability. And if it gets like extremely drastic, it goes way beyond your control. And the problem is that if you're a person that took a lot of risk and actually have built something that provided a lot of jobs, then suddenly it's not just about yourself and your risk, but actually like about a lot of people's jobs and their lives, right?
But I still think that it's possible to force the equity investors to take a bath while the company still remains. Like basically it just changes owners. It goes through a prepackaged bankruptcy, and it passes from the people who were taking the risk to the people who were financing that risk. And so the asset remains. Like everyone understands the business is more valuable as a running, going concern. And so those the companies are still running, but the ownership passes to somebody else, and therefore the lesson that they're supposed to learn about risk is learned. But if we don't let that lesson be learned, and look, there are extremely powerful, of course, interests trying to make sure that they don't have to learn that lesson, right? I mean, this is the big game, right? And of course, you know, at the highest levels, all those people really want to be bailed out. I mean, if I was them, I'd want to be bailed out, of course. But a strong government should be there and say no, right? And unfortunately, the precedent was set in the financial crisis. Everyone gets bailed out. Like they tried twice in the financial, I don't want to go on forever about this, but they tried twice in the financial crisis to let people, you know, learn their lessons with Bear Stearns and with Lehman Brothers. And I guess they saw Lehman Brothers like almost destroyed the whole world economy. So they were like, okay, fine, let's just bail everybody out. But I think that's disanalogous here, because this is not financial companies in a crisis. This is just, you know, airlines, which if an airline goes under, it doesn't destroy the whole economy, right? So I think it's safe to let them go bankrupt. Anyway.
Yeah, I just want to quick chat about how this is going to affect our politics, right? You know, are people going to wake up to say our politicians are charlatans and, you know, they're not solving that problem, or are people going to be more politically? So I feel like people, are we going to move beyond just voting to actually, you know, engaging and be active and knowing what's going on in politics, you know, because I feel like that's what we need versus just, you know, listening to campaign speeches and going to vote, right?
So do you think that this is going to spur online voting? Because I've heard about this idea to do online voting for the American election, but then people are saying, no, we're not going to do that. But it seems like such an obvious idea, like online voting, if they could, you know, get the system set up properly, it would, you know, again, that's another example of saving massive, massive human labor if it was online.
Yeah.
True. And unfortunately, I gotta leave now. Gotta prepare.
All right. This is a good chat.
Even though
Okay.
I feel like a lot of topics were raised in the last couple of minutes that I would like to continue on.
Well, let's chat again sometime soon.